little bit about lagoons. And this doesn't sound right. Is that better? Can you hear me now? In the back? Is that coming through? Okay. What I want to do today is I want to talk about how you can make your lagoons more efficient. Lagoons, some people think of that as yesterday's technology, but it doesn't have to be yesterday's technology. Because we can design systems for you that make you never have to dredge again. And it's really simple. We take your solids and we make them into gas. It's just that simple. And also we meet your modern discharge requirements, all of them. We've learned how to eliminate odors. You're not going to get any sulfur odors. You're not going to get any volatile fatty acid odors. You're not going to get any musty odors, and I'll talk about that. This is really simple. This is what I call push the green button operator complexity. And it's literally all you have to do. Maintenance costs, all we do is change the oil once a year. And the national average for handling biosolids is about $350 per dry ton. And so even though you don't do it every year, you can avoid the possibility of doing that. And it's all natural. We've learned how nature does it, and we've learned how to do that in practice. But let me first contrast that with how you all handle your wastewater systems now. Every wastewater system I've ever seen has some kind of oxygen addition. So that, and what does the oxygen do? It's designed to make sludge. That's what it's designed to do. To convert soluble BOD into insoluble BOD. And then you have a clarifier of some kind to sink it. And that's good because the supernatant then goes to the river or wherever the discharge is. But everybody is left with the issue of what are you going to do with the biosolids that are made. And what we have learned to do is to turn them into gas. And so they leave by gas. And so you do that by making some granules. But I'm going to step back now and I want to know my audience a little bit. How many of you love dealing with sludge? Not many. But how many of you know that with the indigenous bacteria that are already in your wastewater, you can get rid of the sludge all by that. You don't have to have anything else. And do you want to get rid of the noxious odors that sometimes you're... here's a story. This is several years ago, but we were just starting up, and I found a truism that whenever there's ugly odors in a pond, somehow they go straight to the mayor's office. And I asked the mayor about that about a year later. He said, that is absolutely true. He said, no, it may not be the odor, but the complaints do. So deal with your mayor, make him happy or her happy. But making the sludge issue go away permanently is a big deal. Never dredge again. So what is sludge? Well, this is a little simplified picture, but sludge is really dead or active or semi-dead bacteria, basically. And so these little squiggles that I show here, these little squiggles are the supposed to be your bacterial bodies. But you all know that there's also minerals in there, there's other things in sludge, but it's all calcium stabilized. And why? Well, calcium has two positive charges, and they grab an acid group on bacteria and they act like glue. They stabilize it electrostatically. And so what I've tried to show here is that these calciums can stabilize this. What this does is it forms a gel. Now all of you have looked at sludge, and you know that it's got a structure to it. You know that it's hard for the water to be extracted from there. Well, that's because it's stabilized just like a sponge. But this is key. If you steal this calcium, now this sludge just becomes another floating piece of suspended solids, and bacteria can get to it. The whole trick is how do you get the bacteria to get to it? And so if you steal the calcium, you can do that. This is the way you do it. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been involved with come on, there's plenty of seats down front, with an upflow anaerobic digester, but they make granules. And those granules have a bacterial on the outside and on the inside called a biofilm. And this is the way nature protects its bacteria. And so what we have learned how to do is to make these granules in a sludge pond. Now normally, and these are pictures of what they look like in an upflow anaerobic digester. But notice they're porous. And they're not really porous in one sense, but what they are is fluid channels. So that what nature does is it orients various bacteria in a very structured environment so that my waste becomes your food, and your waste becomes somebody else's food. And so the waste is handed around. But this is what they look like. And notice that some are very, very small, and they'll be fluidizable, and some are large and sit at the interface between the movable sludge, which I call alluvial sludge, which is sludge with less than 2.5% total solids, and the gelled recalcitrant sludge, which is the stuff that you have to dredge. And so I'll show you how that works in just a second. But let's go through the biochemistry first. Biochemistry 101. The first step is the step you all know from every waste treatment plant anywhere in the world. And that's that waste and oxygen are turned into bacterial solids and they make carbon dioxide. But in the granules, the biogranules, this whole set of interactive chemistry steps take place. What happens is the bacterial solids are hydrolyzed by facultative bacteria into simple liquids like glucose, like fatty acids, things like that. And then these simple liquids, now they're liquid, they can move around this whole porous interior part of the structure. And they are fermented into serially shorter acids. One bacteria does a step at a time. But they end up with acetic acid, the shortest acid, C2. And then a very specialized set of bacteria convert that into 3 moles of methane and 1 mole of carbon dioxide here. Now this is the trick. That carbon dioxide becomes carbonate, and carbonate wants calcium more than the bacteria want the calcium. So there's this tug of war going on, and the carbonate that you produce locally right at the recalcitrant sludge interface extracts that calcium and makes the sludge free-flowing again on alluvial. And that calcium carbonate now formed is then used by nature to build another granule. Now we get no nuisance odors either. And why? Well, those of you who studied all this know that the textbook, come on in. We need plenty of seats down here. The textbooks will tell you that in this whole process, hydrogen is produced. Very small amounts, but hydrogen is produced. But turns out, it's not always produced. And in these biogranules, there's a very specialized methane generator that called methanoside, but it doesn't allow the hydrogen to be made. So over here is my acid generator. And it's got an electrically conductive arm that sits out off its individual bacterium. And in the biofilm, where everybody's close packed, like everybody's in an elevator. You know, in an elevator, everybody ooches around like this until you're all settled. That's what happens in a biofilm. They all get to where they want to be. But anyway, this literally comes up and plugs into methanoside like this. And so what happens is, this is really cool. What happens is electrons, 8 electrons, move through this arm and plug in directly, just like plugging in your computer. And 8 protons, or 8 acids, are consumed at the same time. And they form 3 methanes and 1 carbon dioxide. But they don't form hydrogen. And when they don't form hydrogen, they can't form hydrogen sulfide. Because hydrogen is a necessary reagent to make hydrogen sulfide. So no hydrogen sulfide, no mercaptans, none of that. So you don't get sulfur smells because you have functionally eliminated the hydrogen. Now this is a cross-section of a pond. At the top, you have a sweet, clear layer, and that's caused by waves. Now here's a particle of suspended solids. Gravity's pulling it down. Okay, that's always there. But when you have a wave going up and down like this, when the wave is on the rising half of its cycle, friction forces pull it down. So now you have 2 forces, gravity plus friction for half the wave cycle. And what that does is it creates a sweet capping layer. I'll show you some pictures. And down here, deep at the bottom, there's the recalcitrant gel layer. And that's the stuff that's all stabilized by that calcium I was talking about. And then right here in red, it's not red, it's black, but right here in red is where the granules sit. Now remember, 3 moles of methane are coming off for every acetic acid. And that fluidizes the little bitty granules. So when they're fluidized, they're doing this. And what happens is they're coming in intimate contact with other waste solids that are coming down, the suspended solids. And they can move sideways. So they can literally colonize the entire pond once you inoculate it. So you start the process, kind of like a match with a fire. And so they have this fluidized bed that can move horizontally. The methane escapes, and then you have this section in here, which is your clarifying section. And then after a while, about 12 months actually, the alluvial sludge is digested. And now we're left with this gelled stuff. Now here's your granule. It's round. And here's your gelled sludge, which is flat. So when you put round on flat, there's a very small contact layer. And so right here, at this contact layer, is where that carbon dioxide extracts the calcium. But it's like a bologna slicer. You take one slice off at a time, so it's a very slow process. Now, so we end up intentionally layering upon just the way nature layers natural lakes. So this is a sludge holding pond, and this is an anaerobic digester bag house. Right here, you can see it here in this picture. This is the same one. And here's our blue fry, which I'll get to. And here's our granules down here at the bottom, because now this is all at equilibrium. You have this long, deep, clarifying section capped by a sweet layer. But look at how the traditional way of doing it. These are splasher aerators. What they are is mixers. They're designed to unlayer. They're designed to stir everything up, and you can see this is what you get. Now over here, we've got this sweet layer, and these geese have decided they want to come here and roost and rest on there. So one of the things about geese is they don't like hydrogen sulfide. So they're a pretty good indicator there's no hydrogen sulfide there. But so this is this, and this is 4 months later. Now, here's a blue frog. I'll talk about that in a bit. But look at the sine waves. You see these sine waves? They do a couple of things. They perturb the blue-green algae. I don't know if you guys know what blue-green algae is. You've never had a problem with that, probably. But here's a little bit of it. But blue-green algae like flat, quiescent conditions. They don't like going up and down all the time. And that's because you bend the light. The waves bend the light. And so they go light, dark, light, dark. And they're used to 12 hours of light, 12 hours of dark. They're not used to every couple of seconds. And so eventually they quit. And they end up with going through a bunch of stages, because there's 800 or so kinds of algae. But they end up with a microalgae, which is very, very small. But what you can see, oops, well, let's go back. You can see from where the light bends here, you can see how deep this is. So we get a 6-inch sweet layer. So it's because we have constant waves. We're not dependent on Mother Nature's waves. So how do we do that? Well, we have a basic circulator, and we actually run it backwards inside a baffled area. And what happens in there when you run it backwards, it's intentionally cavitating. When it intentionally cavitates, it puts up a high shear field. When you have a high shear field, you bring calcium and carbonate that's made by the aerobic bacteria, and you make seeds of calcium carbonate, limestone, and you make calcium phosphate. And both of those precipitate. Now, you also need to have an aerator. So we have a standard aerator, and we also have a way of clarifying the water. We call it a gold frog, and I'll show you that in some detail. This is the basic unit. It weighs 600 pounds. The floating line is right about here. There's a 3-horsepower motor in there, and it moves 7 million gallons a day of water. You say, how can you move 7 million gallons a day with 3 horsepower? Well, we only lift it this far. If you don't lift it very far, it doesn't take much energy to do that. Now, if we run it backwards, we call it aeration mode, it moves 2 million gallons a day, and the reason it does that is because it pumps the water down, but when it pumps the water down, it lifts the chassis up. The chassis takes a gulp of air, and it comes crashing down. It goes like this up and down, it cycles. And that cycling is where you make the granules. Now, we put a baffle around it, this baffle around it, and so if you follow the edge here, the water flows out radially, 360 degrees around it on the surface, and it comes out of here at 39 centimeters a second. So it rises up and it bumps into this baffle until there's enough hydraulic head to drive it straight down, and it ricochets off and goes back into the inlet, and you end up making an aerobic donut. But as the water passes back, it forms eddies. And these eddies drive an induced flow. This is all anaerobic. But notice, one of the things that's really cool is where the water comes down, it forms a waterfall, 360-degree waterfall around the circulator. And that has a very small but finite cross-flow resistance, okay? That means that the path of least resistance is down here at the bottom. Well, the aerobes here are going into an anoxic zone down here, so it selects against aerobes. It kills them because they suffocate. So now I've selected for the bacteria that I want for my sludge digesters. And they find the granules, and the granules then move through the pond. I'll show you that in a second. Oops, wrong one. This is what it looks like. It's a hexagon. Each side is 22 feet. And here you can see the tsunami effect I'm talking about as it comes crashing down. So it happens very frequently. But the key thing is that this is where we make the granules. Now, but you also have to get rid of ammonia. So this is an aerator. We bolt a 1 1/4 horsepower blower to the gear reducer, and we put the air out through 2 headers, and it goes into 4 concentric rings that are staggered of good aeration hose. And so now the bubbles rise up, but they rise up into 7 million gallons a day going horizontal. So to get your detention time, the bubbles go like this. And so now I get my detention time horizontally and not vertically. So you can see one floating here. Now, then what we do is we take some attached growth surfaces. Now, attached growth surface, everybody knows that that's how you grow up nitrification bacteria. And it's 27 inches long here, it's 2 inches thick, and it's 10 feet long. And we put 23 of these spokes around this yellow frog. And an entire new ecosystem grows up. What you have growing up on these spokes, on this matrix, it's naturally a black color, but it's a light tan, and you get sludge worms, you get nematodes or ringworms, you get insect larvae, and what they do is they continuously clean the matrix. So instead of having a fouling matrix, and if you don't have enough oxygen, you get about you get 10 inches of slime on each side. Terrible. But when you have these grazers and shavers there, what they really do, they take suspended solids, which are hard to settle, and they make worm castings, which are heavy. And then the worm castings come down, and they feed the biofilm granules down at the bottom, and you get rid of the ammonia, and you get rid of the carbon as well. And you can put this up in the high carbon part of the zone, which all the books say you can't do that. And the reason you can do that is because with return activated sludge, you're at very, very high suspended solids levels. And that means those are mostly carbon, and they consume all the oxygen. But when you have grazers that graze down the population, so all of them are population limited, then you have plenty of oxygen for both the carbon and the nitrification. Then this is how we get rid of the clarification. These are venturis, which are gas-liquid mixtures. Here's the gas coming in. And when you impinge them one on the other at 7 feet a second, you micronize the bubbles. When you micronize the bubbles stay in the water column. And what happens is the waterfall effect I told you about. This gray is really duckweed, but the outflow, excuse me about the sneeze, I'm from Florida, not used to the dry humidity. Too bad, I like Florida. Anyway, the waterfall I told you about keeps away floating bacteria and duckweed. And so here's a picture of how it happens. This is our gold frog. Here's our baffle. So water flows out here, it comes down here, and in standardized tank testing, this distance here is only about that much. So it's really a boom, boom. It's almost 180 degrees. And what this does, it forms this waterfall, and then it comes back here, and then you get this is all at the clean end of the business. So this becomes oxic now. But sweet layer, that sweet layer I told you about, that blue sweet layer, it's thinner because the solids have fallen out. And so it's lower in density and it's less in viscosity. And so it runs into the waterfall and it can't get through the waterfall, so it goes all the way down to the bottom. And it doesn't enter the continuously stirred tank reactor until it gets down at the bottom. And so this is where the granules are, and so we get it gets digested. And then in this zone here is where the clean effluent is removed. Here's a picture of one. This particular operator doesn't like algae. And the reason he doesn't like algae is because the creek that this discharges into is on his way to his church. And the people he goes to church with give him a hard time, his water's green. So he's got no permit requirement, but he's got very clear green water. To do that, he allowed this duckweed to grow because it shades the pond, it shades the algae and they die. Just like you guys do in the winter. You shade it with ice and snow, but in Georgia they don't do that. And here you can see the outflow from the paired venturis are coming out here, creating this waterfall effect and rejecting the duckweed. All right, so what happens? This pair of bars is for the first cell in a 4-cell municipal plant in Texas. And we got a little over a third in just a half a year of reduction. This is 5 feet of sludge, and we're down a little over 3. This is a hog farm in North Carolina with 5,500 sows. And this is bad, they had 9 feet of sludge here. But in just the first couple of months, we had a 43% reduction in sludge. And hog sludge is the easiest sludge we've found to digest. Now, that's not what all the people say, but it is. It's very much like human waste. But once you get it started, the granules cook it away. This is the second cell in another plant in Georgia. It's the second cell because the first cell was well mixed, and this is where the sludge digested. But we got rid of a third of it in just 6 weeks. This is in Corpus Christi, Texas, just outside Bishop, Texas. And when we started up, this is what it looked like. We were trying to pull a rope from one side of the pond to the other, and the John boat didn't have enough traction because the sludge was all the way to the surface. So here, there's four cells. The first 2 are deep and narrow, but they had 8 feet of sludge in there. And as you can see, the sludge came down in all of these. And this is the average. So this is got almost a third of it in the first 4 months, and a little over half of it in the first 8 months. This is a 7-year study of a poultry plant in North Carolina, and this shows you that there's 2 kinds of sludge. There's alluvial sludge, and there's recalcitrant sludge. And this was our first pond that we did with sludge, and we found out that this is where you get the granules, but they work very slowly, but they work very fast with the alluvial sludge. This is a sludge holding pond for a poultry processing plant in Alabama. And in just 4 months, we got a 22% reduction. And I show you the standard deviation here. This is the reason why is in your ponds, if you really took a good survey of your ponds, you'd see sandbars and you'd see valleys. And what that does is it redirects your water flow in ways your engineer never anticipated. And so when the granules start to eat down the sandbars, they turn them into alluvial sludge, and that flows into the valleys. And so the valleys come up and the sandbars come down, and so the standard deviation gets reduced. This is what happens. This is the pond where we first learned about these granules. This is a farmer in Missouri, and Oklahoma, and he said, "I'm only going to put the first part of the system in because I don't believe you." Okay? And then he went out and he measured his sludge every few weeks, and what he found was an expanding concentric circle of the sludge-no sludge interface. And what was happening is, in hindsight, the biogranules were eating their way across like this around the waterfall of the CSTR. And so then then he allowed us to put the rest of the system in, and he's gradually gotten down to this very low sludge. So here's a picture of his pond. This is Mr. Luthie's farm in western Oklahoma. The first year we got rid of 14 feet of sludge. And this is what it looked like with the typical calcium stabilized floating scum, which you've all seen. And why does it float? It floats because it's stable, just like ice is stable. It's not liquid and amorphous. And also the gas tends to accumulate underneath it and keep it floating. Now over here, this is, we put in a blue flag CSTR at the discharge. This is the return pump to the flush. This is the return flush pump. And what his alleyways now look like they're power washed. This is an important, what happens is that the fat that's in these ponds and the fat that's in a lot of different things is turned into ivory soap, literally. I worked for 18 years for Procter & Gamble in soap and detergents. But what happens is the fat is hydrolyzed into fatty acid or soap. And then that soap then washes the flush alleys, and so the animal health improves. The other thing that's interesting is that the facultative organisms that are produced in the aerobic part of this zone, these are all anaerobic. You're adding oxygen, but you're not the ORP, the oxygen reduction potential, is very, very negative. But what happens when they get on the thin film floor of the flush alley is that the anaerobes die because the oxygen is toxic. But the facultative organisms say, my God, I've come to heaven. They got all this oxygen in a thin film aerator, and they eat the dead slime as their carbon source, and it looks like a pristine floor. Here's another picture of a different hog farm. You can see the sludge. There's no wind activity because the surface scum is so stabilized. You can even see some of it floating here. But look here. This is the water coming back from the barn before. But look over here. This looks like iced tea. And that's because the facultative bacteria population quintupled going through the flush alley. And you can see now that you've got this sweet layer because you can see the wind activity and the wave action. Okay, so what's actually happening now? Here's the cross section again. Here's where the granules are sitting. Here's your gel recalcitrant sludge. Here's your alluvial sludge. This is your sweet layer, and this is your settling layer. So what's happening? Well, granules are formed in that shear field in the Blue Frog CSTR, and then they sit at this interface right here. And we've learned now to digest sludge fast and slow. Now, let me tell you why you don't want to do it fast. When you do it fast, you make a lot of gas. Now, how many of you know about pond turnovers? Of course, you all know about pond turnovers. But the pond turnovers are caused by density difference and wind pushing the water to one side, and then that gets higher than the other side and the pond flips. It's that simple. Most of you think that only happens in the spring and the fall when you have this temperature difference. But if you digest too fast, you make too much gas. What's the gas do? It leavens the entire column. And then you can have continuous turnovers. One dairy farmer said, I've got 25 feet of sludge in a 30 feet pond. I don't care how fast. I just want to get it done as fast as I can. It's going to stink. You can't turn that much mud over without having it stink. And it had a horrendous odor for 6 weeks. But then he had 5 feet of sludge left. He got rid of all the sludge all at once. Most mayors don't want us to do it that fast. But the alluvial sludge is digested in about 12 months. I'll show you some data. And the ancient sludge is digested at a controlled rate. All you want to do is to digest it one skosh more than it's coming in. So it's always going down. So it doesn't matter if it takes a bunch of years, because as long as it's going down, you're winning. And any new sludge is all alluvial. Why? Because the methane is rising, and the new sludge is falling, and so that's fluidizes it. So it gets digested. It never becomes recalcitrant gel. And then you have a stable residual, and this line will then come down around here. And what we find is that about 18 inches is the equilibrium depth. A little bit of that is recalcitrant sludge, truly recalcitrant, and the rest is the fluidized bed. All right, so this is E. coli, a pathogen, and Texas regulates pathogens. And this blue line here is when we started up our system. And this is disturbing the system on day one when you push the green button. And so all these pathogens all reside in the sludge. That's where they are. And but once you get rid of the alluvial sludge, then it calms down and the system stays at a very low level. This is some pictures now. Sometimes pictures are worth 1,000 words. Here you can see that there's a certain amount of gelling going on. This is just after we started up. And then 8 months afterwards, you can see the bobbing up and down from the sludge rings. And you can see also that it's also dug a hole for itself and digested the sludge right there. Now, this is really important. This is BOD results in a municipality over 2 years in Georgia. And what you see is a harmonic decay. You've got a wide variation, and it comes down, and then it goes down slowly. What this is alluvial sludge being digested. What happens is you can get big desktop-sized pieces of sludge that the gas occludes to it, and it raises it up. You've all seen eruptions in your ponds, okay? And then what happens is the gas is released, and then it rains back down, but now it's broken up. And so when you get a big eruptions, you get a BOD spike. And the system eats the BOD, and then another eruption comes up. But once the alluvial sludge is gone, and now you're just attacking the gel sludge, then that gel sludge is just taken off with one bologna slice at a time. So that's the BOD. This is the TSS. You see the same thing. You say the same thing. This harmonic decay to a new lower equilibrium. Now, those of you with really good eyes would recognize that we're down to a single-digit BOD and single-digit TSS here. This is the temperature in Missouri, in Sedalia, Missouri, last year and this year. And this is the BOD results. And what you see is that, surprisingly, you're still getting this BOD reduction, and there's granules in all 3 cells in this particular pond system. Now, in January, I don't have it plotted, but the number was 22. So temperature does affect it. But because you're making most of the BOD reduction at the bottom of the pond, where it's 4 degrees C, that you're temperature independent. This is in northern Ontario. We're about 15 miles from Lake Superior and 20 miles from Lake Huron. This is last winter, and this is this winter. This is this last winter, and this is this winter. And these are yellow frogs, but you can see a kind of a lily pad approach where you're bringing warm water up from the bottom, and it doesn't freeze until it's lost its temperature out of the periphery. Now that it got brutally cold here, you see snow on the machine, not where the motor cover is, but you still see free water there. So we operate at cold temperatures. How do we design a system typically for sludge removal? Well, these 2 ponds are in parallel, and this is a tertiary pond. So we have our blue frog CSTR, and we have another circulator, and then a quiescent area where we allow for settling. And what this does, this makes the granules, and this helps distribute the granules, and then the granules do the work. And then if you have a bottom-to-bottom transfer, we don't need another blue frog CSTR, but we need something to get the granules down at the bottom. They won't go uphill. They will move horizontally. And then we have our sentinel yellow frog, which helps our clarification, and the gold frog clarifier. So this is how we design most of these systems. All right, so what happens to nutrients? That's something that might be important here in Minnesota. But when sludge is digested, that is a reservoir for nitrogen and phosphorus, and that gets released. So you have to deal with that. And the nitrogen can be removed biologically. That's easy. You get your spokes, and because we have our water going parallel to the surface, not across, that we self-clean. So the grazers that I talked about, the worms and the larvae, they are our self-cleaning mechanism. That's like continuously scraping your filter, and then turning the hard to settle suspended solids into heavy, dense worm castings. And so we get rid of the nitrogen that way. Calcium's different. Phosphate's different. We get rid of about half of the phosphate in making the granules, because the granules are calcium carbonate and they're various moieties of calcium phosphate. Now, what we've also found in ponds where there's a lot of magnesium, we make a salt called struvite. Struvite is magnesium, ammonium, phosphate, hexahydrate. Every pond's got plenty of water. Every pond's got plenty of phosphate. Every pond's got plenty of ammonia. What they don't have is enough magnesium. And but if you're in a high magnesium area, then your phosphorus is much lower, because struvite is 2 orders of magnitude less soluble than aluminum phosphate. So once you've made it into a struvite crystal, it sinks and it's there for the duration. You can also add magnesium into our system, because when you run this impeller in the aeration motor backwards, the low pressure side of the impeller goes from below the impeller to above the impeller. You can drip it down the annular space around the shaft, and it goes out like this into the shear field and becomes struvite. No one's asked us to do this yet, but if anybody here wants to, please talk to me. How do we do it? Well, it's real simple. They come in a truck, they get lifted out, they're 600 pounds. You take them to the side, you drop them in the water, you tie a rope to them, and you hook them up to the tow hitch of a 4x4, and you tow them to the right place, and hook up the electricity, and you're ready to push the green button. They're anchored with a long iron post, like a UV protected rope. And the reason we do that is because we found that UV protected rope is much better, because it's lighter and it lets them bob up and down as opposed to metal wires. And so the commercial part starts, but if anybody wants to work with us and let us write a case study, that's what all this says, write a case study, then we can discount our pricing because we want the data. How do you do it? Well, we have an evaluation form where you tell us what you want us to do. And then within a week or so, we turn that around with a preliminary design, and then we have a video meeting with you, webinar, and we review it, and that's when we go back and forth and say, well, I meant to say this, but I really want this. Then back and forth, we come back, and then you give us a 50% deposit, and about 4 to 6 weeks later, you're installed and you're up and running. What we found over time is that we have to provide the electrical control boxes because various local electrical engineers or electricians had different ideas of what a good quality electrical box is. But they're really simple. There's an on-off switch. We put reverse so that if you get a Walmart bag or something that fouls an impeller, particularly on startup and when you're digesting sludge, there's all kinds of unknowables down there, and you turn it the other way for a minute, it unwinds itself, and you're good to go. Overload protection, phase protection, lightning protection, all that. So we provide all that. What you provide is an electrician to do the wiring, because we don't know the local codes. And you provide the mounting posts and brackets, and we tell you how much cord you need, but they're 12 4-cords. The Yellow Frog's got 2 motors, so it's a 12-7, so with a common ground. And in some instances, we put in a little more wire so that if you want to move the units around a little bit, you can. But what do you get? Well, you're bio-dredging your pond, so that happens in situ, in place. And your water will meet your discharge requirements. And it's a modular system, so you don't have to put in everything for your growth. What you do is you put in what you need now, and if you grow or you got a new industry or something like that, we come in and we add another unit or two. So you reduce your financial risk. We guarantee our work. We agree on what we're going to do, and we do it. And if you want to, we can lease it so it can be an expense item as opposed to a capital item. All right, so any questions? I'd love to help design one of your systems, and we can do. I know we're going to leave this room, but we can talk outside. So are there any questions? Oh, it can't be that good. Yes, sir.
Well, this is not about the thing. It's just I can't believe that a city the size of Sedalia has a pond system.
Sedalia does not have a pond system. Sedalia, the Maplewood subdivision does, the 250 homes. It happens to be 5 miles from the airport where the temperature monitoring station was. So that's why. Any other questions? Well, thanks a lot for your attention, and I hope you learned something today.